Real stories of werewolves, of dogmen from history, from your emails, illustrated and animated with the democratizing magic of machine learning AI. Welcome to Scary Stories.
Tonight we've got a very special episode featuring 1 hour of werewolf and dogman stories. We're going to grant an encore viewing to my favorite episodes of the past couple of weeks that may have been overlooked in their original presentations, but first, we've got this story that's new to me, from someone who never emailed us before. It's a young woman from Pennsylvania, and she wants to tell us about her sighting of the Female Alpha Werewolf. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have one weird thing that happened to me, but it was very weird, and it did involve a werewolf. So you're going to want to read this on your NYC show. This happened back when I was a teenager and I used to hang with these bitches that were into magic and whatnot. When I was with them, I called myself a witch, but I didn't know what I was talking about. Most of the time we would just smoke clove cigarettes and sit showing off our nails on the Ouija board planchette, but it didn't ever move, and nothing spooky ever really happened. Except for this one night when we were hanging in a cemetery way out in the woods near my mother's place. I don't want to out her, but we're talking sort of western central Pennsylvania. The graves in this tiny graveyard are mostly Civil War era, and the witches told me before we got there that we would be unwelcome there. I asked why we were going then, and they told me, well, welcoming spirits are boring. It's more fun to go where you're not wanted and stir up the dirt. So the story really doesn't take too long to tell, and it doesn't always sound as scary as it was to live through it. Maybe I just don't tell it right, so feel free to spook it up if you can. Just don't change the facts. This was the scariest thing that ever happened to me. Okay, so this cemetery is small and in a clearing in the woods. There's a little knee-high fence saying no trespassing that we lifted our floor-length spooky witch skirts and climbed over. The others were in kind of a party mood, but that place made me feel very sad. I didn't want to disrespect those Civil War soldiers and their families, and I didn't feel right walking over where they were trying to rest. Anyway, I wasn't a leader back then. I was just a high school brat, and I did anything these witches said I should do. Not that I think they did anything wrong, but it was just wrong for me. I was an idiot and I know that, and I learned some stuff the hard way. Now I'm out of school, I got a full-time job, and I'm a lot more serious. But back then, I don't know, I thought I was going to be like Princess Taylor Swift, and not have to pay bills or whatever. I was going to live an enchanted dream life. So we were in this little cemetery with such sad gravestones. One was for a soldier who lost his life in battle, and another was for a newborn child whose first day on earth was also his last. I felt so much for each of those people, and when the girls started to pull the Ouija board out, I asked them to put it away. They were pretty shocked that I suddenly expressed an opinion, and I think I was too. They asked me why should they put the Ouija board away, and I looked around desperately for an answer to give them. I hadn't planned on the conversation going that far. Suddenly, my eyes caught them. An entire pack of them. There were wolves marching out of the woods and heading in our direction, in the direction of the cemetery. It had rained a bit in the night, and we had noticed how the muddy dirt was getting all over our faux vintage witchy boots. But when that wolf pack came out of those woods, somehow they raised a cloud of dust up around them. I felt completely cold all of a sudden, like I had lost all my body temperature, and I shivered all over. I pointed to them. I pointed to those wolves, and I told my bitches that we needed to move out of the way of, them bitches. Now, this is the part that was the scariest, but when I tell it, nobody gets why it's scary, especially guys. See, what was going on was there was a chick in the middle of the wolves, marching along with them toward the cemetery. At least at first I thought it was a girl our age, and I couldn't tell if she was sort of captured by the wolves or something or what. But they were all staring forward in the same direction, And when they got a little closer, I could see that she wasn't moving where they wanted her to. She was leading them where she wanted to go. And the furry outfit I thought she was wearing, well, this is gonna sound like BS, but it was her fur. Or it looked like it really was her fur. Maybe it was a costume. But if so, it was a skin-tight one and it looked very real in the moonlight. Like for instance, her head was like a wolf head, but also a human head at the same time. She had dog ears up on top, but she had long blonde hair hanging down. Most of her fur was dark, so I could sort of mainly make out her female human-like shape sauntering forward, with her dog ears on top and her bright, lit up, glowing animal eyes. They all had glowing eye shine. All the wolves. It was the creepiest thing. Even my girls backed up. The three of us moved out of their way and watched them move past us. I choked on the dust they raised, so this wasn't any sort of hallucination or mental projection or anything like that. It was a real bunch of creatures, most of who looked like giant wolves, and they were being led by one wolf woman that looked like something from a heavy metal album cover. I would like a t-shirt of her, please. Now, I never saw a wolf woman before, and I've never seen one since, but I certainly would feel for you if you had to run into one. They are scary. When I tell people this story, though, they either seem bored or even laugh at me. I got scared of some old lady who didn't shave her armpits, like so what? But she wasn't old. She was, just regular. Like me. She was an adult, but not an old adult. But she wasn't either one, because she was a wolf, or a wolf lady, or a werewolf. Maybe she was just a mutant wolf. Maybe she was a shapeshifter. Maybe that was an entire pack of shapeshifters. It gives me the creeps to think about it. Maybe they were skinwalkers or something like that. Maybe they were spirits of the forest. Whatever they were, they marched in a straight line through the cemetery and on into the woods on the other side. I asked the witches what was in that direction, and they said that guy Devin lives over in that direction. I realized I'd been there before. Devin was kinda too innocent to be part of this gang of werebitches we just witnessed. I don't know where they were headed, but I doubt it was there. So, we went back to my place and watched my mother's VHS tapes of Bewitched from like 100 years ago. We had a fun afternoon, but the werewolf pack with that alpha female had sort of taken the wind out of these two. You'd have thought they'd be inspired by her, but no. I think they only enjoy the idea of magic and witchcraft as long as they could imagine they were the most powerful beings around. But it was hard for them to see themselves as being very powerful at all anymore. Not since we'd witnessed the march of the female alpha werewolf. So there are these two different email addresses that send me these weird, very short delivery man werewolf stories that are kind of a lot like each other. I sometimes wonder if these two guys know each other or if they even might be the same person writing me all these. And I'm also including another story which is from a third source. Before we begin, I want to say that the terms werewolf and dogman are used back and forth in these stories in various ways. All the anecdotes in this episode have been sent in as true stories, and I'm not going to call anyone so nice as to send me their stories a liar. You can decide for yourself if you think these literally happened or might be more apocryphal in nature. In either case, get your popcorn ready, because I'm going to read you a collection of mostly very short delivery person werewolf baby stories. First story, The Cutest Little Thing. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have been a delivery person for my entire life, starting when I was a teenager living with my parents, and continuing straight through to today, when I am 23 years old living with my girlfriend, who is not really in this story. Well, she kind of is because she loves puppies, and we were thinking of getting one as this story happened, so she was on my mind as this happened. What year was this? I guess 2022? The pandemic was over, but I would still put a mask on when I got out to deliver the pizza just because there were individual customers that this still mattered to for whatever their personal psychological reasons were at the time. It was a hot day, and I'm not good on a hot day with a surgeon mask on, so I would try to get the pizza handoff to be as streamlined as I could make it, so that I could take the sweaty, unsanitary thing off my face. I used to get pimples in the shape of my surgeon mask. Anyway, I rang the doorbell and then noticed the door was open and slightly ajar. I knocked on the door, leaning my head in tentatively, and I announced that I was the pizza man. From upstairs came a voice sounding like the father in Leave It to Beaver or the Brady Bunch, and he told me to come into the air conditioning and that he'd be down with my cash in a second. Now, I don't like the heat, so he didn't have to ask twice. I stepped inside and lifted my mask to wipe my face off. We still used to take cash back then. Now we no longer do on delivery at the pizzeria. You have to pay us in advance over the phone or online or at the store before we go out with your food. It wasn't because of this particular story, but there were a lot of weird things starting to happen around this same time. And so we were forced to join the other pizzerias in our area and eliminate cash payments for delivery. If this same thing happened today, I really wouldn't care. I would just ring the doorbell and leave the pizza. I would never do the things I did on this night. But I needed to get the cash from the customer, though. And so I placed myself into this situation that I would never take part in today. Okay, so where was I? Oh, right, I was standing inside this guy's house trying to cool down as much as I could in his air conditioning. The pizza was hot, but I saw a table a few feet in front of me, and I walked over to take the pizza out of its carrying case and leave it on the table for the man whose voice I heard. As I was doing this, I noticed a baby carriage in the room, and it was swaying just a tiny bit. Curious, I walked over to see the baby, but what I saw gave me the kind of surprise that makes you laugh out loud. Inside that baby carriage, this guy had put this little gray puppy dog. It was the cutest thing, too. I spoke baby talk to it since it wasn't a baby carriage after all. The dog seemed to love that kind of treatment, and I like dogs, so we were getting along. I was thinking of asking the owner what breed this was. My girlfriend would like a dog as friendly as this one was, but I had never seen any sort of canine that looked quite like this one before. I heard the sound of someone coming down the stairs, and I heard that dad voice call out to me, saying something like, "I see you found Junior in his crib." And I thought, well, that's a funny name to give your dog. Junior? But I was more concerned with getting my money and getting out of there. So I bit my tongue and I walked over to the staircase. There, I saw not a man, but some kind of a dog-headed entity walking down the stairs. He was holding out cash, offering it as payment for the pizza. He was saying something too, but I don't know what. My mind was flipping out at what I was seeing, and I just ran from that place all the way back to the car. Then I sped out of there. That pizza had to come out of my salary, but I didn't want to get any closer to that dog-headed werewolf man than I already had. The claws he held that money in looked long and sharp and probably carried all sorts of diseases on them from the look of them. My boss laughed at me for running away, but I'd say I dodged something deadly, like maybe a handful of sharp rabies-infested claws. Story number 2. Baby werewolf dressed as a boy. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I used to deliver for an Italian restaurant way back at the tail end of the 20th century. I got to see some wild things, including some exotic pets that I'm pretty sure couldn't have been legal to own. But the wildest thing I ever saw was the baby werewolf. At least that's what the lady called it. I rang the doorbell of her house one full moon evening. It was one of those full moons that was so bright, it wanted to make sure you noticed it. As I was waiting for someone to answer the door, I was still staring at that moon. When the door finally opened, the lady who unlocked it for me walked away, saying something I couldn't make out. I walked a step or two inside after her, asking her to please repeat herself, but too late. She was gone. I laid the bags of food down on a random level surface and I looked around at the place, which had some expensive looking paintings and vases in it. I also noticed a strange vintage baby carriage and I walked over to peek inside. Well, if it had been a normal baby, I wouldn't be writing to you, so obviously I found myself looking at a monster. In this case, it was a gray, furry monster with cute little pointy ears and a sweet little dog snout. Someone had dressed this puppy up in the clothes of a toddler, and it was a very cute thing to see. Also, it seemed a bit insane to me. Who am I to judge the rich, though? I might become as batty as they do if I had too much money too, who knows. So the lady came back in the room and she was still mumbling about something. I told her dog was nice and she corrected me and said it was her son. I was like, okay, sure, he's your son, and I told her how much money she owed me. I just wanted to get paid and get out of the wacky house. The lady laughed and grabbed her purse to fish out the funds, as she insisted the dog was actually her son, and that the kid's father was a werewolf. You did notice the full moon tonight, didn't you? She asked as she handed me some bills. Oh, I noticed all right. The full moon always brought out the most interesting people. So anyway, 2 or 3 weeks later, we got a call to deliver to that house again, and I didn't want to do it. I tried to trade jobs with this other guy and get him to do it. I didn't want to see the lady who thought she was married to a werewolf again. But nobody else could take the job, so I was forced to return to this crazy house. Again, I rang the bell. Again, she opened the door and walked away mumbling. Again, I went inside. But this time, I noticed something different. This time, she had put a human baby in the baby carriage. When she came to pay me, she noticed me staring at the baby. Ah, yes, she purred. Baby is far less, her suit. When it's not the full moon, eh? I took the money and beat it out of there without saying one more word. She wanted me to believe that baby was the same thing as the dog she had in the crib the time before. She really was bats, and I was gonna end up as batty as she was if I didn't get out of there fast. I didn't work at that restaurant too much longer. So that was the last I ever saw of the baby werewolf dressed as a little boy. Story number 3. Baby Dogman in a baby carriage. Dear Scary Stories NYC. This is one of those WTF kinds of stories that even the person it happened to can't fully understand. That would be me. This is my only cryptid sighting, except I don't know for sure if that's what it really was. Maybe it was a paranormal incident. Maybe it was something far more ordinary, and I'm just misinterpreting it and blowing it up into something that it's not. This happened back a few decades when I was delivering newspapers in early mornings. Or I was in the process of quitting doing just that. I was taking my cousin and neighbor Vito on my morning newspaper delivery route so he could take over for me in a few days. It was just starting to be dawn that morning. The light was in the sky, but it was still a bit dark in terms of your hand in front of your face. This was my second time taking Vito through the route, and this time I wanted to show him a shortcut through the woods that would shave 4 or 5 minutes off if you were biking and even more if you were walking it, as we were that morning. Once we went in the woods that morning, though, it got dark and weird. Like the weather felt off. The colors were strange, nothing was ordinary, and I regretted my decision to take Vito this way. Then Vito saw it first and called out to me. An old baby pram, as he called it. A baby carriage, and it was rolling downhill toward us. We both ran over to arrest the descent of the carriage and pulled it to a stop alongside the dirt path. Inside was a bored and sleepy-looking little dog. He had a big head for a puppy, looking sort of like a furry gray space alien. I ran up to the top of the hill to see who he belonged to, but I was surprised to find nobody around anywhere. If nobody had pushed him over the top of the hill, how had he come down on our side? Baby carriages don't generally have motors, so someone had to have pushed him, right? Yet I could see nobody there. I trotted back to Vito and Pram Boy, who were making friends. My cousin was patting the little guy's belly, and the little one was wrapping himself all around his hand and acting sleepy. It was quite a cute scene, and Vito told me that the puppy had the softest fur in all history. So neither of us were expecting the loud sound that erupted from the woods to our side. It sounded like a bark, but it sounded like a scream and a roar too. We looked and saw, running out of the forest toward us, what most of you would probably describe as an adult werewolf-style dogman, but which Vito and I just judged as a monster. It was an alpha male monster, and suddenly we understood what Vito had been petting and playing with. This guy's son. Hearing its daddy approaching, the excited puppy bit down hard into Vito's hand, causing my cousin to get a little loud. He didn't get as loud as the dogman running toward us, though. And as soon as the feral dogman pup released its grip on Vito, the two of us ran like hell onto the next house we needed to deliver a newspaper to. Suffice to say, Vito never used this shortcut ever again. Why? Because of the baby dogman in a baby carriage. And our final story of this episode, story number 4. Crazy Rich Alsatian. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I had a delivery job in the old days that would take me to some crazy neighborhoods, both rich and poor, and in between. This one rich house I visited had an extremely eccentric master. At least that's the look he had, the impression I got. This place was seriously the Addams family mansion. I rang the doorbell and wasn't too surprised when an actual butler answered the door. This was the late 1980s, but he was wearing a tuxedo like he was Lurch's nephew or something. This guy wasn't as tall or weird, but he wasn't not weird. The butler gave me a dirty look when he answered the door, but I showed him I was there to make a delivery. He rolled his eyes as though the very idea offended him. Then he opened the door wider, bidding me to enter. I walked in mostly just out of curiosity to see how the other half lives, you know. I was looking around for stuffed polar bears, but this was just the entryway, so who knows. Maybe they really did have one. It looked and felt very old, and none of the photos or paintings made much sense. Wooden frame portraits with bronze dates on the bottoms of the frames. Fading old photographs of dogs wearing human clothing, some of them apparently dating back 120 years or more. This wasn't just a loony bin I had wandered into. It had been a loony bin for generations and generations. The butler returned before I realized he had left. He told me that the master was ready to see me. I told him I just needed the cash and I could leave. I didn't need to see any master. I offered the bag of food to the butler and I held out my palm for payment. He looked at my hand as though I had the flesh-eating disease. And then he repeated that his master would see me now. He gestured toward the door the master was apparently behind, and then he turned and quickly walked away when he saw that I was about to ask him another question. So I walked into this old door frame with a red curtain in it. I held the curtain aside and saw that I was entering a room filled with burning candles. I walked tentatively forward and I saw a strange sight. It was sort of a baby carriage, or maybe it was a tiny old wheelchair. I'm not sure of the furniture, because I was more interested in who was sitting in it. This was a dog, but it was dressed as a man. A very small man. Or a baby? Was this a puppy, or maybe was it an old dog? Why was it wearing clothing? Did it dress itself, or was it just a dog someone put clothes on? Then, it spoke, saying, "Be calm." I dropped the food and ran out of that house. I know he hadn't paid me, but that was fine. I just needed to go. When the butler tried to stop me at the front door, I spun around him and nearly fell down the entire flight of stairs in front of the building. I suppose I actually did fall down those stairs, except I kept landing a foot or a hand on this step or that, instead of banging my head on those same stairs. Somehow I found myself down at the sidewalk before I brained myself. It was not through any athleticism on my part, I can assure you. I attribute it to 20% adrenaline and 80% luck. I told this story to one of my girlfriends sometime after it happened, and she said I was crazy to risk falling down concrete stairs just to get away from my cute little puppy. A cute little puppy that spoke, I reminded her. Woof, she said in reply, and of course, I ran out the front door screaming, as you do.
Comfort t-shirt for 2024. Scary Skull logo is back for more. You won't find the sucker in any store except for our online store with scary merch galore. No matter how big or small you are, we've got a Scary Story sculpt t-shirt in your size. Modeled here by actual werewolves, but made to fit humans as well. Link is in the description. T-shirt for 2024. Scary Skull logo is back for more. You won't find this sucker in any store except for our online store with scary merch galore.
John Carnagon keeps going on. He's legendary like Leviathan. Please join me in thanking this episode's executive producer, John Carnagon, who donated to us recently using our handy-dandy thanks button located under each of our YouTube videos. Sometimes they sort of hide it on the right side these days, but it seems to still be there last I checked. And it seems John Carnagon located it too. Thanks, JK. Werewolf Trap Fail. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I grew up in a crazy family, but our cousins in Wisconsin were even crazier than we were. Have you seen that show on TV where those hillbillies keep building traps to catch cryptids and the monsters keep getting away? Well, if you have, then you've essentially met my cousins from back in the day. No, none of the actors on that show are related to me. I just mean that when I would get sent to stay with my cousins because my parents were fist-fighting again, or because my uncle who hurt kids escaped from jail, or any of the other heartwarming reasons that Mom felt it would be too dangerous for me to stay with her, my cousin's life always seemed to be like I tuned in the middle of that cable show about catching cryptids. They were always setting up some Rube Goldberg device to try to catch a monster that I was never even sure was real. I kinda got the vibe that most of their monsters originated at the bottom of a bottle of their homemade moonshine. I'm not trying to say that my cousins were insane because they tried to capture cryptids. I'm just saying that they were insane and also they tried to capture cryptids. I remember when I was an older kid, almost an adult. I guess I must have been 15 or 16 or 17 by that summer, and my father had somehow destroyed the kitchen while I was at church, so I got sent back to Wisconsin to stay with the fam until Dad cooled down. This time when I arrived, they had gutted their old ancient garage and rebuilt it into a large, cage. But not like a prison cage, more like a giant bird cage. Some of the thin metal used in the caging was so old and rusted, it looked like it would collapse if you blew on it. It wasn't going to hold anything large. The cage was too fragile. And it wasn't going to hold anything small either, since some of the spaces between the skinny bars were so wide, a grown man could climb in and out of that cage with ease. I asked my uncle what they expected to trap in that thing, and he proudly told me they were going to trap themselves, a real werewolf. I laughed so hard that my uncle got a bit insulted, but I simultaneously hurt myself because I was holding most of my laughter back. That was just the funniest thing I'd ever heard. I mean, I was used to my family clan talking about Bigfoot all day long, but this was the first time I found out that they thought werewolves were real too. Well, I had my laugh and it was good and long. And then, soon after, sure enough, a real-life werewolf came along and took his turn, laughing at me. I remember telling my uncle that cage wouldn't hold his mythical monster, and he asked me why not. I reminded him of the time that he, I, and one of his sons had come within 100 feet of a mama bear and her 2 cubs, and I reminded him of how scary she had been when she stood up and scared us all away. Uncle was like, so what? This werewolf we're catching is even stronger and wilder than that mama bear. Which of course meant that he was making my point for me. No way that chicken coop of a cage would hold a mama bear. If he wanted to catch something even wilder than an angry mama bear, well, he was going to need something less rusty and rickety than what I was looking at. So he got angry and called me a dumb city kid, and he pointed out the stone pillars built at each corner of the structure that it was braced on. Those were from the original garage building. They used to have a wooden structure built upon them, and now it was this sorry thing instead. The columns seemed to have been made in haste, around 100 or 150 years prior, by taking rocks from around the area and cementing them together. It looked like they would be pretty solid until something large hit into one of them. Not so sure after that. So anyway, imagine my surprise when one morning I woke up a little bit before usual to a whole lot of screaming outside my bedroom window. I got dressed fast and ran downstairs to find that not only was there a large furry creature trapped in that former garage, but it looked to be a large male werewolf-looking thing. I walked in circles around that garage, looking at the beast from every angle I could. It was not a costume. Any costume made by my uncle or cousins would look as bad and flimsy as this monster trap I was walking around. That was some kind of living animal, although what kind I'm still not certain to this day. I'm sure you basically know what I was looking at already. It stood up like a man, but its legs were more dog-like than human. Its front legs were more like furry human arms than they were like the front legs of a canine, though. And the paws, although not entirely different from bear claws, had opposable clawed fingers that looked a lot like thumbs. It would naturally rest its paws holding onto the wire bars as it looked out at us, and it resembled the way a man in prison might hold onto some bars in his cell. Its head was canine, but it also reminded me of a bear in some ways, other than the pointed ears and the length of the snout, which was longer than most bear snouts. So, was it a mutant pointy-eared bear with hands? Was it Jack Nicholson or Lon Chaney Jr. in costume? Was it a canine beast as large as a bear that walked upright? I don't know what it was that I was seeing. I suppose it was the Midwestern Dogman, but what does it even mean to say that? We humans have never gotten one in captivity. We've never had one studied by science. Science! I told my uncle we should call the local college to come take custody of the creature, for safekeeping. I told him we should call the zoo, call the Smithsonian, call the newspapers. My uncle gave me a dirty look and got sarcastic with me. I thought you didn't believe in werewolves, city boy. So how come now you telling me what I should do with this here figment of my own imagination? Everyone laughed and made fun of me for not believing in the werewolf, and for not expecting the cage to hold, which it barely was, by the way. Hence my urgency about notifying someone else to take over from this point forward, in the name of science. Uncle told me that my jaw was hanging open so far in surprise that they were all going to start using my mouth for an ashtray and a spittoon. That got a big laugh from my cousins, who joined in, mocking me for being wrong about everything so far. But the more I said the monster should be turned over to some institution or another, the more my uncle and cousins insisted that this dogman was their property, and they were going to use him to get rich. I asked how, and they told me that nobody was going to be allowed to see the monster until they paid my uncle a full $1. And if they wanted to take a picture, why, that would cost $10. Everyone congratulated my uncle on his fine business mind, and they started discussing what improvements they could make to the property once regular money started flowing in from the exploitation of the dogman. I told him we should go get someone from the newspaper and bring them back to see the monster and take a picture. Uncle asked why. I said if they ran a photo of this monster, then maybe we could raise enough money to build a real cage to hold the beast. Uncle asked if people could buy a picture of the monster in the newspaper for 10 or 20 cents. Why would anyone pay him $10 to take a photo? Then he told me I didn't understand anything about business and shooed me out of his way. Uncle started assigning each of us boys to run off and perform some different errand for him. I told him I thought it was us gathered around the cage that was holding the dogman where he was. He was probably just waiting for a moment when nobody was looking to attempt to slip out of that cage that had so many holes in it. Uncle gave me a dirty look and said stuck pigs make happier sounds than I do. And then he sent me on my way. Sure enough, by the time I got back from this useless errand, the Dogman had already escaped. Uncle was looking at his failed trap, trying to understand how the creature had gotten out. We all pointed out the 3 places in the alleged caging that were large enough for any of us to squirm through. And Uncle disagreed, insisting his cage was impregnable and inescapable. He threw a lot of polysyllabic words around as though that would bring the Dogman back. But no matter how hard Uncle argued with reality about how the Dogman could not have escaped, reality kept winning the debate every time, because that Dogman had escaped. Nobody had even seen him leaving, and we had no photographs or other evidence that he had ever even been in the crappy trap in the first place. It was a fail in every sense of the word, although to my family, I was the only one who had failed. I was the only stupid one because I hadn't believed that the Dogman could be trapped. For months and years, Uncle and my cousins bragged about how they had been the only men in history to capture a Dogman. If I would dare point out that the creature had escaped from them in under 3 hours, they would ask how many Dogmen I had captured and how long I was able to hold them. They would tell and retell the tales of how they collected the materials to build the cage out of, how they used rotting deer meat you could smell for 1/8 of a mile away to lure the monster in, and of how idiotic city-dwelling me had wanted to give the monster away to the Smithsonian Institution. They would tell the last part as though the current situation was somehow better than the beast being studied by science. They had let the creature get away, and now all their brief capture of the beast meant was an anecdote you could tell after a beer or two at a party, and that was that. No evidence was collected, and humanity was brought no closer to understanding what a Dogman really is. Instead of proof and true answers, all we got in the end was a werewolf trap fail. My brother captured a Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC. My brother captured a werewolf one time. It was probably a Dogman in our opinion. He didn't hold it long, but I saw it with my own eyes and I know this story is true. This was way back a long time before I ever heard of the Dogman, which was when I saw it on Monster Quest on cable. I don't remember what year that was, but I was an adult by then. And the story I'm talking about was when I was a kid back in the 1970s in Michigan. There was about 6 or 8 years when my dad's job in Detroit paid well enough that we lived in a home like people do on TV. And we had an in-ground swimming pool and stuff like that. We were out in the burbs close to the woods, and that was the best time of any of our lives. It would all crash down in the 80s and 90s, but for a while, my family got to live like kings. Like Al Bundy or Archie Bunker, owning our own home, like we were BlackRock or something. My brother, who I will call Earl, had been seeing the Dogman at night outside our house, and he had begun waking me up so I could see the beast too. It looked just like you would expect it to. Dark silvery fur, tall pointed ears, glowing eye shine in the night. It stood up like a man and it seemed taller than our dad, who was not a short man by any stretch. We were looking down out of our second-story windows at the thing outside at night, but its head looked a little too close to our window. It felt like he was 20 feet tall. But these are memories of when I was a little shrimp myself. All my memories of things back then are probably larger than they actually were at the time. We started to tell our parents over breakfast that there was a werewolf prowling around our room at night. We were both into horror movies back then, and so our parents just thought we were being creative and imaginative. When Earl asked Dad if we shouldn't do something about it, Dad told Earl that he was trusting him to come up with some good plans to put into motion. Of course, Dad was just humoring my brother, but neither of us realized that at the time. We thought Dad had deputized Earl and placed him in charge of protecting the family from the Wolfman. We both took the assignment very seriously, believe me. So when Earl was 15 and I must have been 13, I guess, our parents decided to go away for a weekend and leave the two of us alone. This was when we decided to put our plan into action. We would capture the Dogman ourselves while our parents were away, so as not to place them in the line of danger. Our parents did not understand how truly scary this cryptid was, and it would be wiser to leave them out of the loop. We were very protective of our mom and dad. We always saw the Dogman standing in the same area in the trees. Earl took pork chops out of the freezer in the late afternoon, and he tossed a couple of them on the ground near those trees. Then he laid pork chops, spare ribs, hamburger meat, and whatever else we had that he thought the Dogman might like, in a line on the ground leading back to our house. His intention was to get the Dogman to wander over to our kitchen door, which Earl propped open. Inside, he laid more meat on the floor leading down to the basement stairs. At the bottom of the staircase, Earl laid a tripwire that would slam the door back into the kitchen shut, trapping the beast in the basement. To me, it seemed like a genius plan, like something out of a movie. I felt like Earl was brilliant beyond anyone else on the planet. Yet even I was surprised to hear that door to the basement slamming loudly shut at 3:20 a.m. And when I ran downstairs and met Earl in the kitchen, neither of us could believe that we had actually trapped something. What we trapped, though, we would have no way of knowing until we went downstairs and looked. Earl excitedly opened the door and peered down into the pitch darkness of the basement. We both saw the glowing eyes, and then the pointed-eared silhouette. This was some kind of a man with a canine head. This had to be the creature we had been seeing. This was exactly what we had hoped to catch. Those angry eyes began loudly charging up those stairs at us, and Earl quickly slammed the door shut, locking it. We both ran upstairs to our bedrooms, crying like little girls, which was not our nature. We were wild boys in those days. But that monster had reminded us that we were still just kids, and we were suddenly way out of our league. Heck, we were out of our parents' league by that point. Then we both ran upstairs and cowered in a corner pathetically. Once we had calmed down a bit, we started to try to figure out what to do. We had put a lot of thought into catching the Dogman, but no thought at all about why we wanted to do that, or what we would do with the creature after we trapped him. So it wasn't so much that we had to come up with a plan B. It was that we needed to finish creating plan A. When our parents called to check up on us, neither of us had the nerve to explain what had happened, although Earl did mention that we ate all the meat in the house already and asked if there was more. As I have already indicated, those were rich times for our family, so they just thought it was funny that we boys like meat more than vegetables. And they shrugged off the expense of having to stock up on meat again when they got home. I know Earl was trying to lead into telling them about the captured Dogman in our basement, but he never worked up the courage. And soon it was dark, and we were too scared to go back downstairs at all. As the sun rose on Sunday morning, Earl woke me up and said we had to figure out how to get that Dogman to go away before our parents got home that evening. We had to clean up and pretend nothing happened somehow. This was the best plan he had been able to come up with. So we both nervously walked downstairs and noticed how quiet it was. Maybe the monster was sleeping. Maybe it had starved to death from no food being in the basement. We had no idea what to expect. When we reached the kitchen, everything was how we had left it. The door to the basement was intact and had not been busted down. We slowly opened the door and peeked down there, but we couldn't discern any movement or bad odors. Shining a flashlight didn't reveal anything either, until we noticed the window high off the floor had been broken. That window was one that Earl had once gotten stuck in one time, so it was too small for the Dogman to have possibly crawled out of. He had to still be down there. Yet we both went downstairs into that basement, and the Dogman was long gone. The only way he could have gotten out was through that window. The window that was too small for him, and yet that was how he got out. It just had to have been. The rest of our day was mopping and cleaning meat up from everywhere in the kitchen and stairs and out back. The Dogman was a sloppy eater. When our parents came home, we were nervous as hell that we had missed something, but I guess we didn't. They were just happy to be home, and we all crashed and got ready for Monday. It was like nothing had happened, and the Dogman didn't visit us anymore after that either. Maybe he got his fill of pork chops. Or maybe he just didn't appreciate that. My brother captured a dogman. Well, what do you know and what do you see? Our newest executive producer is named LB. Please join me in thanking LB, our newest executive producer who made this episode possible. LB got to see our recent secret members-only Dogman stories. Mama punched the Dogman in the face. I caught an illness from a werewolf. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I am sick in bed as I write this to you, but I swear to you that I caught this illness from a werewolf or dogman that I had to deal with a couple of days prior to coming down with this sickness, whatever it is. I am especially interested to hear back from my doctor about what specifically I have contracted, as I wonder if it is something new, or if it is a standard human kind of illness. I think that when I learn that, and find out if it is something that canines can also get, it will go a long way in letting me know if my encounter was with a dogman, or if it was in fact with some kind of a werewolf, who was also part human. I'm trying to organize my thoughts before I tell you what happened to me, but I'm starting to realize that this might sound like a cautionary tale as I tell it. I did a number of things that I can't really defend this time, and I feel kind of stupid now that I'm writing it all down and looking at it. I guess at least some of what I went through could have been avoided in a couple or three different ways now that I'm looking back on it in retrospect. So please don't do what I've done. This following story is not meant to encourage anyone to follow in my footsteps. In fact, I have learned and am still learning lessons from my poor choices. Although I still love nature, I think I've learned to respect it a lot more. The natural world is not the same as the Disneyland interpretation of it that most of us have. Nature is not a manicured park. Nature is truly wild. And if you don't respect the wild aspect of the world we live in, you can get yourself savaged by it. This is because the word wild and the word savage mean the same thing. And we humans have a tendency to forget that. Yes, nature is beautiful, but it's also hungry. Get too close to that beauty, and you will get swallowed up in it and by it. Sometimes quite literally, quite painfully too. What this story has reminded me of is that there is more than one way to get taken down by the world. You can get eaten for lunch, or you can get attacked by life forms so small that even insects can't see them. You can be felled by a predator, or you can have your story ended by a microscopically small germ. In my case, I sorta got a bit of both at the same time. So I had a pretty strange experience with a dogman or werewolf. It might be a little hard explaining this one, and I'm not over being ill yet, so that makes it harder. Basically, I was camping because my wife kicked me out. She's literally having an affair with her own divorce lawyer, who's trying to take everything from me, not just my wife. It's a bad time for me and my self-esteem is at a low. My friends all side with her, and it's hard not feeling very down and depressed. I know that lowers my immune system and makes me more liable to catch bugs, so I am trying to get my head back together fast. However, I miss my young son, whom my wife has legally changed the name of without my permission, and is not allowing me to see. And I'm having trouble staying positive as I subsist out here in the forest in Wisconsin. I know that better times can't come out of me feeling depressed, and that I can't turn things around if I'm being a Debbie Downer. But you don't care about any of that. You just want to hear about the dogman or werewolf or whatever it was. So how did I come into contact with that creature? Here's how it happened. I woke up, and he was there, inside my tent, sleeping next to me. Yeah, it made no sense to me either, but I'll describe exactly how I remember it going down. I was having a dream about my uncle who I used to spend summers with as a child, during the years before my parents split up. While they were fighting, my life was actually better, since I was sent on a tour of all our nicest relatives. Once the divorce was finalized, though, both my parents remarried. Both of them got new kids, and I didn't belong anywhere any longer. But when I was with my uncle, I felt okay because I knew he actually cared about me. and I knew I was with my uncle when I heard him snoring. He was a heavy-set guy, and even when he was awake, it sounded like he was snoring. So I came to associate the sound with a feeling of comfort. That night in that tent, I heard a loud snoring, and instead of waking me up like it would for most people, I think it drove me down deeper into sleep somehow. But eventually I did wake up, and when I did, I groggily turned over to say good morning to my uncle. Except, he wasn't my uncle. He was a monster. I screamed and backed away, trying to get a better look at my new tent buddy. This was a dog-headed ape man. This was some kind of a bear with arms more like a man and legs more like a dog. This was not something that I would have ever invited into my tent, and I can't really understand how he crept in without waking me up the night before. Of course, I made an effort to get to the entrance exit of the tent and make good my egress, but the beast man prevented that from happening by moving between me and my goal. I was ready to cut my way out of that tent, and I pulled out my Swiss Army knife. The creature grabbed it away from me before I could even pull the blade out. I was panicking, and I was already out of options. That was when the creature sneezed on me, which was just as disgusting as any other dog sneezing on anyone else has ever been. I don't know if you've had that happen to you, but this was not the first time for me. It was the first time it was this gross, though. I felt almost like he just marked me as his turf or something. It became apparent to me soon that this creature was not feeling well. He seemed to have a runny nose, and the same could be said for his eyes. He had a sad look about him in general, but I don't know what the average attitude for his species might be, so I have nothing to compare it to. I was being held captive by this beast man who seemed to be larger than myself and seemed to have a canine head. At least it looked more like a dog or a wolf than it looked like anything else. I wouldn't say it was your average dog head, though. It was kind of taller and more intelligent looking. So let's call it a dogman or a werewolf, because it was something along the lines of one of those things. Now, I am not the youngest man, nor am I the most agile. I don't think I could have escaped this predicament even when I was much younger. But at my age, I was completely at the mercy of this man-thing. I had no idea what to do, and I had no means to execute any ideas that I did have. This creature was larger than me, faster than me, and clearly so much stronger than any human as to make the idea of attempting hand-to-hand combat absurd. I was basically just lucky it hadn't crushed my skull already. And if my luck was to continue, it was gonna have to be because the dogman decided to allow it too. In other words, my continued existence was dependent on the dogman agreeing with the general principle of me continuing to exist. So I stopped trying to get away from the thing and I just focused on not getting it upset instead. I hoped that it would get bored of me agreeing with it and leave the tent so I could try to lock it out. Or maybe it would run off and I could pack up and go. In either case, I couldn't do anything until or unless the Beastman made his move first. And so I waited, trying not to pee my pants or vomit. I was so nervous I don't even have the words to describe it. I was a twitchy mess, blinking and scratching itches that didn't even exist. I suddenly developed every nervous tic that any human has ever had, and I felt like this was driving me insane. On top of all this, the creature itself had an awful smell of illness around him. I'm not sure what else to call it except that. His nose and eyes, as I've already explained, were runny, and he filled my tent with the smell of his cold, if you can sort of imagine what I'm trying to say. I know that it had rained the night before, and so I suppose the sick creature jumped inside my little man-made cave, since there must not have been any other shelter available. But I could hear that the rain had now stopped, and I wished this creature would move on, or else that he would allow me to escape the tent and make a run for it back to my car. I was visualizing how to get back to the parking lot in the dark, and I began wondering where my cell phone was. I could sure use the flashlight on that if I ever did succeed on making it out of this tent. and so my eyes darted around, hoping to locate the device. When the monster shifted his weight at one point, I saw that it was beneath his butt. That sank my hope, since besides not wanting to reach toward a monster's private bits, hoping to grab my property back, I wasn't sure I would even want that phone back anyway. I couldn't see if he had broken it or not, plus I figured his butt would probably be just as sick as his face and head seemed to be. I was only getting more nervous and freaked out the more I tried to calm myself down. My stomach started to make noise, and I realized it was hungry. I myself was not hungry, I felt nauseous, but I looked around for my bag of trail mix, only to notice nuts and squashed M&Ms all over the tent floor. The dogman belched loudly and I knew where my breakfast had gone. The smell of his cold hung in the air, mixed with the bad dog breath smell, and I started to gag, trying not to throw up all over the dogman in front of me. Surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, the dogman himself fled out of my tent when he thought I was going to hurl all over him. Think how much time I could have saved if I had thought of that earlier, right? So once he was out of my tent, I sprang over to zip it up behind him, but it smelled god-awful in there, and I really wanted to go outside along with the dogman. I remember hesitating, but the vomit breath smell inside there was just too much to take, and so I gave up and opened the tent up. Then I stuck my head outside, breathing out bad air and choking on it before beginning to heave in new fresh pre-dawn air. My lungs ached, but the air tasted so good that all I could do was focus on breathing and choking until I began to feel a bit better. Once I did, still panting and gasping for air, I looked up and I saw the dogman. He had withdrawn a bit from the tent and stood mostly on his hind legs, but with one forearm down on the ground in front, apparently for balance. His eyes were wide and held an expression of horror on his face. It took me a few seconds to realize that he was still grossed out, that I had almost thrown up on him. Partially because I was lightheaded, and partially because I was just fed up, I quickly moved to get out of the tent and then staggered forward, making retching noises, as though I were about to puke all over this dogman. Just as expected, he let out a high-pitched doggy whine and beat it off into the woods before I could get too close to him. I can truly say that my dogman experience ended when we each got sick of the other one. Literally. Well, except for the fact that I felt really achy while I packed up my tent and belongings, achier when I hiked back to my car, and achiest as I called and made an appointment to see a doctor who is friends with my family. Let's call him Dr. X so he can maintain his anonymity. I am sick with something, but is it something that a dog can give you? Or a bear? Is it something you can catch from an animal is what I'm trying to ask. Because I have a runny nose and runny eyes, and I feel like he looked when I was stuck in that tent with him, do you follow? So I wonder if this is a known disease or something new. Is this something from another dimension or reality? Because I saw a show on TV and they were saying that the werewolves jump through portals. If they came from the other side of one of these dimensions, then they must be bringing new kinds of illnesses here with them, same as the Europeans brought smallpox to the Americas. On the other hand, what if it turns out to be that I just have the flu? Or some other already known kind of bug? What will that tell us about the creature I was cooped up with? Will it mean that animals in his dimension have human illnesses? Or might it mean that he was in fact a human being who only appeared to me to be something other? I think I'm asking if I had a werewolf in my tent and not a dogman. Here's why I think that's not that crazy an idea. This creature or entity went to sleep in a tent where a human was already sleeping without waking him up. That doesn't sound like something a wild animal would do to me. He also ate my trail mix before going to sleep next to me and snoring loudly. His behavior seems more human to me than anything else. Or I guess I mean it feels like the behavior of a creature that had a dim memory of having once been human. Like a werewolf might have. Whatever, it's just a theory. I never felt like I was trapped with a wild animal. I felt more like I was being not allowed to leave by an intelligent creature. But feelings are feelings, they aren't facts, and so that's just my gut reaction to all of this. I want to wait to hear what Dr. X's blood test and nose scraping tell him before I send his email off to you. Addendum. I have just heard back from my doctor's office and they say I have a kind of illness that I don't know if you're supposed to talk about on YouTube. It's a certain kind of a bug that got famous a couple years back. Basically, I've got a cold and the flu and a fever. I looked it up and this specific kind of a flu is not something that a dog can pass on. Although supposedly they can catch it from humans. So if that creature really was as sick as he looked, and if he really was sick in the same way that I am now, then he had to have either been human or some third kind of being. I could not have caught what I have from a dog. I could only catch it from a human, or whatever that creature was that I had to deal with on that awful night that I will never forget. So I think I may possibly have narrowed down what a werewolf is, or at least what that particular dogman or werewolf was. It is close enough to being human that I can state with some certainty that I caught an illness from a werewolf.
Comfort t-shirt for 2024. Scary Skull logo is back for more. You won't find the sucker in any store except for our online store with scary merch galore. No matter how big or small you are, we've got a Scary Story sculpt t-shirt in your size. Modeled here by actual werewolves, but made to fit humans as well. A link is in the description. T-shirt for 2024. Scary Skull logo is back for more. You won't find the sucker in any store except for our online store with scary merch galore.
If you want a coloring book full of monstrous delight, then give this a look. It'll give you more fright. Scary Stories coloring book, werewolf coloring book. And just to make your mind explode, it's a digital download. All it costs is $2.09, and then you will be feeling fine. Coloring monsters today, hey, it's a coloring book, hooray. Okay, link is in the description.
If you like this show, raise your hand and say yes. Then please thank our EP, Inolin Reyes. Please join me in thanking Inolin Reyes, our newest $10 channel member here at Scary Stories. This means they get all our perks, including our over 25 hours of secret uncensored episodes. We're long overdue for making a new volume of those. I better get my butt in gear about that soon. If you would like to find out how to get all the same perks that Inolin Reyes gets, then listen to what our international TV spokesmongrel Henry Lee Dogman has to say. Hank? Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button. Or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that when it cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.